Okay. Oh, there's your face.
Hello, Sandy. Hello, everyone. Hello, Kay. Hey, Russ. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Dale. Nice to see you again. Oh, there are a lot more of you here, but I haven't seen your names yet on my feed, so excuse me. But in any case, I know that there are 18 of you here altogether. So thank you very much for coming. And let's get started. Okay, so you know the economy's collapsing, right? It's like I pointed out to you that after last week's results, or actually it was the week before last, we had 28 million people who are unemployed. Using the U3 statistic, of course, there are many more than that if we used the U6 statistic. But just take the headline statistic here, and that's should total altogether 28 million now, 6 million before, another 22 million we just lost. In another 3 days, by Thursday, there'll be a new result for last week, and we can probably expect 4, 5, 6 million more unemployed, which would lift the total up to what? 33, 34, 35 million, depending on exactly what it is. We have to note, we have to note that uh, things are collapsing very, very fast. Meanwhile, Congress is dithering. The Republicans, of course, don't want to vote on any appropriations to bail people out, to bail most people out. They've already got what they wanted for the big corporations and for rich people to bail them out. They're now trying to do something, do more for small business people because, of course, they originally voted 350 billion for small business people, which was too little in order to protect the paychecks and some of the operating expenses of those small businesses. But of course, small businesses didn't have the capability to put in the applications quickly. So what happened is that hedge funds and larger businesses of the so-called small businesses going up to 500 employees, still a small business. I don't know in what fairy tale world 500 people being employed is a small business, but that's another entirely different kettle of fish. What we have here, okay, in any case, other than a complete and utter and misleading misuse of language, is an obvious giveaway to richer people and richer businesses to bail them out in the crisis to see that they are taken care of. So, of course, there was an outcry because small business wasn't really getting any money because the real small businesses didn't have the capability to even put in the applications in time to take advantage of the appropriation until the appropriation was basically all sold out. That is, there were already applications for the 500 billion people. So now we hear rumblings that behind closed doors, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell are dickering about another bill, and this other bill is supposed to produce something for small business people, for hospitals since they're having a hard time, more for state and local governments, of course, and maybe even some little pittance or crumbs for people, But we don't really know what they're talking about. We don't really know what they're talking about behind closed doors. But what they plan to do is what they originally did with the $2.2 trillion relief bill. They'll write the bill they want to write, and then they'll put it to the people in Congress, saying to them, we got to do this now. We got to do this now. You don't have time to read this bill. Now, you don't have time to find out what's in that bill. We had time to write it, to take all this time to write it, and just to leave you there, okay, essentially not knowing what we were doing. We had time for that, but we didn't. I think I was cut off in mid-sentence, but what I was basically saying is that they wanted they want to drop a bill on people in the House that they will not have time to read. And they will be pressuring the people to vote on that bill without actually reading it and finding out what is in that particular bill. So, that's the kind of thing they're trying to do again. I'm sorry for the interruption, by the way. It's just, it happens First my camera went out, then my sound went out, and then I had to reset everything again. I don't know why that happens, but it does happen usually at least 2 or 3 times every live stream. Hopefully it won't be any more than that in this live stream. But anyway, here we are. So, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and the Republican leaders are playing their usual games. And Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are preparing to give up what leverage they have. Because if they pass this next bill and they give to small business a sufficient amount that the Republicans are satisfied, then the Republicans will suddenly say, oh, we now do not have the capability to spend any more. We've done all our spending. We've already spent something like, what will it be then, 4 trillion or 6 trillion? Sorry, I was right in the middle of a sentence there. What I was saying was that they'll suddenly tell us that they've spent whatever it will be by that time, 4 trillion, 6 trillion, okay, or whatever it happens to be, and they will say, oh, we've now spent so much, we can't possibly spend any more for you, the people, for the working people, and for the middle class people, because we've done all this for the other people, the corporations that are people, the rich people who are people. And Steve Day says, Shahid Buttar, pay go Losi, pay go Losi. Yeah, pay go Losi is suddenly going to start being pay go Losi again when she hasn't been pay go Losi up to this point. But when it comes to us, she's going to be pay go Losi again. So I wanted to start to cover some of that particular baloney, the news related to that kind of absolute baloney sausage, to use a term I once learned from a friend. Okay, keep sharing, by the way. Keep sharing. This is worth sharing, even if you're losing my feed occasionally. This one is going to be worth sharing. Please share, like, and subscribe. I know you can share, like, and subscribe when we get to the YouTube video at a later time. And you can share and like on Facebook. So please share and like on Facebook. Okay, so last time I had a bit of unfinished business which is relevant to what we're talking about today. That is an article that was published in The Guardian by Yeva Nersessian and L. Randall Ray, Randy Ray, one of the MMT fathers. And the title of the article is, which was published on 17th of April, 2020, the title of the article is Coronavirus Has Destroyed the Myth of the Deficit. The myth of the deficit. I'm sharing my screen now, and I will connect you up to that so you can see it too. So here we are, and we have a picture of Trump signing something, which of course won't be giving much relief to people. And the article says, only a month ago, a stimulus bill for $2 trillion would have been unthinkable. Indignant deficit skulls would have asked how one planned to pay for it and complained about burdening our grandchildren with debt and bankrupting our country. Bernie bent over backwards to explain how he was going to pay for a Green New Deal or Medicare for all. These programs don't seem as expensive anymore. Suddenly the government is planning, quote, helicopter drops, unquote, of cash. Larry Kudlow, who relentlessly attacked the Obama stimulus during the global financial crisis, is touting the current stimulus as, quote, the single largest Main Street assistance program in the history of the United States, unquote. Main Street? Where is Main Street in these bills? Where is Main Street in these bills? Certainly not the people who live on Main Street. Nobody is seriously asking how we are going to pay for the stimulus. And they shouldn't, say the authors. It took a global pandemic to explode the myth that the federal government spending has to be, quote, paid for, unquote. The COVID-19 crisis has clearly demonstrated what should have been obvious already. Provisioning society, whether with food, disinfecting wipes, toilet paper, or medical supplies, is not a financial issue. Is not a financial issue. If we can't produce enough masks, ventilators, or food, finance will not help. Society's capacity to produce real output is what limits its ability to provision itself. And this is precisely what the virus threatens as workers stay home, supply chains break down, and businesses shut their doors. Yes, we can see all around us that businesses are shutting their doors. If we take the car out and we drive around, we can see all the businesses that normally serve us that have been shutting down because we cannot take advantage of the services they provide. On the financial side, a sovereign government can always afford to buy what is for sale in its currency, as MMT theorists have long explained. It cannot run out of money because it simply credits bank accounts when it spends. This is not a prescription, but merely a description of what actually happens. In the United States, Congress passes the budget while the Treasury, in cooperation with its fiscal agent, the Federal Reserve, makes the necessary payments. Yes, indeed, that is exactly what happens. Okay, of course, if the Treasury doesn't have enough money in the Treasury spending account to spend its appropriation from Congress, then the Treasury Department will have to get the Federal Reserve to create new reserves for the Treasury spending account. We'll have to get the Federal Reserve to add to the Treasury spending account by making new deposits to the Treasury spending account. Not that those particular deposits actually represent the reserves that are added by the Federal Reserve to the Treasury spending account. No, those deposits are lost in the settlement process, destroyed by the Fed, and yet there will be new reserves that will be added to the Treasury spending account as a result of the settlement. So, it is the Treasury, in cooperation with the Federal Reserve, that will create the necessary reserves in the Treasury spending account so the Treasury can make the necessary payments that Congress has appropriated, so the Treasury can do the necessary spending that the Congress has appropriated. This happens through the thick and thin of the business cycle, crisis or not. If the U.S. government wants to buy more ventilators or masks, finance cannot be an impediment. But what happens when ventilators and masks are not available for sale, even as companies are operating 24/7? More money may not solve the problem, but the government still has a role to play. During the Second World War, the U.S. quickly became the arsenal of democracy. by repurposing its productive capacity to meet the needs of the war. Through diligent planning, quote, lipstick cases became bomb cases. Beer cans went to hand grenades, adding machines to automatic pistols, and vacuum cleaners to gas mask parts, unquote. Heavens, all that happened through diligent planning, right? That dirty word, planning, enabled us to win that war, World War II, and to be the arsenal of democracy, quote unquote. Why aren't we the arsenal of democracy now? Maybe it's because we don't spend enough now, and maybe it's because we don't plan now. We don't like it when the government plans. We only like it when businesses plans. And businesses, with all their capabilities, don't have the capability to create their own currency. Guess what? So if they're going to do anything, they have to loot ours, don't they? We were able to, quote, to cut, quote, production time for Liberty ships down from 365 days to 92 days to 62 days and finally to 1 day, unquote. Well, I'm sure that was good, okay, for the Liberty ships, and in the end, the Liberty ships were very important in terms of winning the war. But those Liberty ships were so shoddily built that my favorite uncle at that time was on such a Liberty ship when it was split by a storm off the coast of England, not more than a mile or two off the coast of England. And the damn thing sank. And my uncle was unable to get to shore, and he drowned. So those Liberty ships were great, but they were pretty shoddy also. That's a story out of the past. Anyway, we can mobilize our resources once again to build temporary hospitals and to ensure a sufficient supply of medical equipment and whatever else is necessary to overcome the crisis. Burying into the deficit myth for decades, buying into the deficit myth for generations, we have been living below our means, paralyzed by the belief that finance is the constraint. Of course, we didn't simply get paralyzed because we're stupid. We got paralyzed because we were propagandized into believing the belief that finance was the constraint, into believing that we could become insolvent, that we could go bankrupt, that the federal government could only get money through taxing and borrowing. Prolonged periods of slack and jobless recoveries have disincentivized investment and hurt our productive capacity and our labor productivity. Even in good times, our economy leaves millions unemployed or underemployed and a significant amount of our capacity idle. Before the epidemic, our factories were only operating at 3/4 of capacity. We have underinvested in public health care, education, and infrastructure, and imposed extreme limitations on our social assistance programs. As of this writing, the administration still plans to go through with its plan to kick 700,000 Americans off the food stamps program to save a measly $4.2 billion over 5 years. And this is while, people, this is while that same government just passed a $2.2 trillion bill that would deliver $4 to $6 billion worth of spending through the magic of of putting up a certain amount of money for the Federal Reserve to cover its losses so it could create the $6 trillion, right? So we can have $6 trillion anytime we want for the rich corporations to back them up, but we have to save a measly $4.2 billion over 5 years from the food stamps program to prevent poor people from not starving. Wonderful. We have been living, they say, in poverty in the midst of plenty, as John Maynard Keynes aptly noted in the Great Depression. Once this crisis passes, and here comes the punchline of this article, the deficit scolds will be back at it again, trying to put roadblocks in front of policies that are progressive. We will be told if that we can't afford Medicare for all, jobs for all, college for all, or halting climate change. The centrists will try to get us back to, quote, normal, unquote, i.e. an economy that leaves so many behind. Now watch for that move. Right after they pass this measly little bill they're trying to put together right now, that's going to give small business a bunch of money, or at least finally allow some of the small businesses to underwrite their payrolls. Right after that, they're not planning on doing much more. They're planning on frustrating the progressive Democrats and frustrating us and leaving us behind. That's what Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell are fixing to do. And Nancy Pelosi is going to start to fulminate about how the federal government can't pass any more because already there's all this money that is out there that we're going to have to fund through issuing debt, and we have to worry about how large that's going to build up the debt. Going on with the article, it is imperative that we resist. What progressives need to push for is creating a different kind of economy through a Green New Deal. To do so, we need to distinguish between the myths and the real constraints, understanding that what is technically feasible is financially possible for a sovereign government. Affording the Green New Deal is about real resources and technology, not about finance. The original New Deal was also dogged by concerns about excessive government spending. The Second World War eliminated that obstacle, unleashing extraordinary economic efforts, mobilization, and decades of prosperity. Hopefully, the coronavirus crisis will not be as destructive as the Great Depression. But if there is one thing it should destroy, it's the myth of the deficit. Now, I need to remind you that the myth of the deficit is something that Stephanie Kelton is going to address and, I know, dismiss in her new book that is coming out in June. Okay, Amazon. We all should be reading that book at some point. There are some really good books here that make a lot of these points as well. Randy Ray's book, specifically Modern Money Theory, a primer and macroeconomics for sovereign monetary systems, does a real good job on the deficit as well. If you've been to my site at josephmfirestone.com, then I have a number of books on there that treat the myth of the deficit as well. First, by fixing the debt without actually breaking America. And then, of course, my fiscal myths of the 2016 campaign, which I now could just as well change the title to The Fiscal Myths of the 2020 campaign that we are likely to hear, that we're likely to hear about fairly soon. Then my books, 2 volumes on real fiscal responsibility, Volume 1, and Real Fiscal Responsibility, Volume 2, which are about the antics of the progressives and the antics of the Peterson crowd, okay, in their efforts to put blocks in the way, okay, of federal spending. Uh, so there are 4 books right there. And then also my book, Who Needs a Balanced Budget? And Who Needs Balanced Trade? Or Who Needs Balanced Trade? Question mark. Or Who Needs a Balanced Budget? That book also is in part about the myths of the deficit and what a sovereign government can do. So there's all sorts of literature on there that you can read to learn about why the deficit is a myth. But let me go on. So next, I wanted to get to the present political crisis. Sorry. That was taking a minute. Let me again share the screen. This one appeared in reader-supported news. It was originally from Vox by Li Zhu. And he says, support for a once radical idea, the government funding of company payrolls, is growing in Congress as the legislative body scrambles to respond to the coronavirus pandemic. By the way, he published this on April 19th. Scrambles to respond to the coronavirus pandemic and the massive economic fallout that is resulting. And the newest proposal on the subject, the Paycheck Security Act, comes from Senators Bernie Sanders, Mark Warner, Doug Jones, and Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut. Now you'll note that Sanders is the leftmost senator on this. Next most lefty senator is Senator Blumenthal. But then Mark Warner and Doug Jones are fairly right-wing senators within the Democratic Party. They're centrists. And Mark Warner is a definite fiscal hawk. Okay, but nevertheless, their bill, which was shared exclusively with Vox, would fund a portion of a company's payroll costs, up to $90,000 per worker who's been laid off or furloughed, if a business can demonstrate that it has suffered a 20% month-over-month drop in the revenue of the business. The thinking behind the legislation is similar to that of a bill introduced by Pramila Jayapal last week, and an idea put forth by Senator Josh Hawley, who's a Republican, in an op-ed in the Washington Post. But Jayapal's legislation would cover a company's payroll costs up to $100,000 per employee, while Hawley's suggestion would cover 80% of wages up to the median wage in the United States, which is about, I think that's about $55,000 to $60,000 now. Support for such plans is spanning an increasingly broad range of lawmakers. And Warner says, quote, Bernie, Doug, and I represent the breadth of the Democratic Party's thinking on this. Yeah, it goes across the spectrum of the Democratic Party. If these senators can get their will done in the Senate, they'll be strongly opposed by Moscow Mitch, of course. These ideas are picking up steam as lawmakers discussed what should be included in the next economic stimulus package from Congress, which may not be approved until May or later. Given the overwhelming demand for unemployment insurance and small business loans that's been observed in recent weeks, lawmakers see a comprehensive effort like this as increasingly necessary to reduce the layoffs and relieve some of the pressure on an already overburdened unemployment system. Yes, some of them are seeing that, but some of them are also about to become deficit scolds. Deficit scolds. I'm waiting to hear the deficit scolds start to scold. This bill intends to keep workers employed so businesses can resume their operations more quickly once the economy is up and running again. Companies interested in receiving these funds would have to maintain worker pay and benefits and offer to bring back those they have laid off. We need some simplicity and efficiency, Bernie said to Vox. Quote again, if I lost my job and I'm trying to get through unemployment, I can't make that connection because they're overwhelmed, unquote. So they can't get the unemployment insurance. And by the way, you know about that extra $600 a week that was going to be added to the unemployment insurance payments? Well, that $600 has a calendar deadline of 4 months. 4 months from the passage of the bill. So if you can't make a connection with the unemployment insurance people to get on the unemployment rolls, you can't get that extra $600 a week for 4 months. I mean, maybe a month goes by and you can only get it for 3 months, or maybe 2 months goes by and you can't make a connection, and half your unemployment insurance type of bailout money is gone. Half of it is gone if 2 months pass. And let's put this in dollars. If 1 month passes, you lose $2,400. If 2 months passes, you lose $4,800. How do you like those apples? The legislation would provide businesses of all sizes with grants that cover part of workers' salaries and some operational costs for up to 6 months. This proposal is inspired in part by a provision in the CARES Act, which helps guarantee paychecks for airline workers through September. That's the one that Bernie got through by pressuring in relation to the CARES Act. And he got that for the airline workers. Of course, the airline workers pressured very, very hard under Sarah Nelson, who was very effective. She is a union leader that is very, very effective, and they got that for the airline workers. Now what Bernie wants to do is to extend this to the rest of the workers. What the bill would do and how it's different from other proposals. Legislation would provide businesses of all sizes with grants that cover parts of workers' salaries and some operational costs for up to 6 months. Okay, the proposal is inspired by a provision in the CARES Act. You're right. I went through that already. These grants are specifically intended to cover up to $90,000 in wages for every worker who has been laid off or furloughed as a business. They could also include up to 20% of revenue to be used for operational costs like utilities and rent. The monthly payroll costs would be calculated using a monthly average between January 2018 and February 2019, depending on whether a business operates seasonally. There are some eligibility restrictions, however. To ensure that this funding goes to the business that need it most, the companies that currently have 18 months of average payroll on hand in cash would be barred from receiving these grants. Those that are receiving funding from the Payroll Protection Program, that's the small business program they passed, and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program would also be ineligible unless the money they were getting from either of those programs ran out. Business would be able to demonstrate their need for the program by showing documentation of month-over-month losses in revenue. The Senator's white paper doesn't yet specify exactly what time frame would be used for these losses, but the program would likely use numbers from January to March 2020 with an adjustment for seasonal businesses, according to a Mark Warner spokesperson. The grants would be doled out via a partnership between the Treasury Department and the IRS. So that would be a lot faster than going through the SBA. Some of the delivery mechanisms, okay, the proposal suggests a payroll processors, which could get the money to businesses more quickly, or a direct bank deposit from the IRS straight to companies, which of course could go very quickly. Using these processors could eliminate the backlog businesses have experienced with other programs like the Paycheck Protection Program, where many people are still waiting for their small business loans. Okay, they're still waiting. They never got through. In fact, they're waiting for the extension of the program, the extra $250 billion being considered now. There are some slight differences between this plan, okay, and Jayapal's, which is a bit more generous. Hers would cover up to $100,000 per worker, for example. Warner notes that the decision to focus on furloughed or layoff workers is to address clear gaps that companies are facing. So I'll leave you to go through the rest of this. I have linked to it. I want to mention that similar programs have been implemented by Germany, Denmark, okay, and the UK. Okay, there are other countries not as wealthy as we are that are doing this kind of thing already. Why can't we do it here in the United States? Because we have Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy and Chuck Schumer and Moscow Mitch to contend with. And they don't care about people. They don't care about small businesses. They don't care about the workers. We have to make them care. If they don't actually deliver for us now, they will never deliver for us, and we have to make them pay for it at the polls. Kevin McCarthy should lose his seat in the House, and Nancy Pelosi should lose hers if she fails to deliver. And we should get Schumer at the earliest opportunity, and we should get Mitch this year, too. He's running this year. We need to get him out of there. And we got to make sure people know it's because he won't pass any relief for most people. We got to make it clear to those people. First of all, we got to defeat him. Then we got to make it clear to other people we defeated them because they didn't give a shit about us. In the past 4 weeks, a staggering 22 million people have filed for unemployment. That's not the last. There's another 4 to 6 million people coming. This coming week, on Thursday, we'll learn about it. Last week's unemployed. It's going to lift us into more than 30 million U3 unemployed. To combat the scale the economic crisis the country is experiencing, the senators argue lawmakers need to think more expansively than they otherwise might. They sure do, especially about what monetary sovereignty in the United States makes possible. Namely, that they can pass almost any program they want, as long as it provides people with the money to get along until the coronavirus crisis ends. They can guarantee the paychecks, okay, of everybody. It is not a fiscal problem because the economy is falling to pieces. We need to get people spending again and buying things again to keep the economy going. And by the way, we need a federal job guarantee bill. And one of the reasons why we need the federal job guarantee bill is because we need to have people doing productive work during this time. And if they can sign on to a federal job guarantee program, we've got all kinds of things for them to do, including contact tracing of people who have been victims of the coronavirus. We need that contact tracing done. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of workers are going to be needed for that contact tracing. Where are they going to come from? They can come from a federal job guarantee program. Yes, they can. So, what else is going on? Well, there are rumblings, so that some of the backbenchers in Congress, like Ocasio-Cortez, who are not being consulted about this bill, who are not getting to see the inside of this bill, who have to sit there while Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Kevin McCarthy and Moscow Mitch hash out details of this bill. Ocasio-Cortez hears rumblings that people are going to get crumbs. And this is what she has to say. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the only Democrat in Congress to oppose the previous multi-trillion-dollar coronavirus bill. I'm going to share that again. Excuse me one moment while I share it. There it is. You should be seeing it now. The only Democrat in Congress to oppose the previous multi-trillion-dollar coronavirus stimulus package said during a conference call with progressive leaders on Monday, that's today. By the way, this article was written for Common Dreams by Jake Johnson, and it was published today. That communities across the United States cannot afford another incremental relief bill that delivers crumbs for the vulnerable and massive bailouts for big businesses. And she said, incrementalism is not helpful in this moment. It's not helpful for people to say, oh, well, we got something. We might as well support it. You know, we got a nickel. We got a dime in $1 trillion bill, so a nickel is more than nothing, so we should support it, is unacceptable. It's like putting a Band-Aid on an enormous wound, unquote. As the legislation that Congress passed last month fails to deliver adequate relief to workers, by the way, relief that most workers probably haven't seen yet. I know, I haven't seen the $1,200 I was supposed to get from that bill. Bonnie hasn't seen the $1,200 she was supposed to get from that bill. Hasn't come to us yet. We file our taxes every year, but it hasn't come to us yet. Our credentials and our coordinates are on file with Social Security. We get our Social Security funds every month without fail, like clockwork. They know the bank to send the money to. Not there, not there. Big businesses have their loans already, but we don't have our lousy $1,200, do we? No. We're still waiting. How many of you are still waiting out there? As the legislation that Congress passed last month fails to deliver adequate relief to workers, the unemployed, and small businesses, lawmakers and outside advocacy groups are pushing for the inclusion of a slate of priorities in the next major stimulus bill, including 2,000 monthly recurring payments and opening Medicare to the unemployed and uninsured. That sounds like bills that have been introduced by Senator Bernie Sanders and Pramila Jayapal, and in the House by Rashida Tlaib. The $2,000 monthly recurring payments paid for by $2 trillion coins. That's Rashida's bill. But a Democratic leadership is at the moment focused on negotiating interim legislation that would provide additional funding for a flawed small business loan program and hospitals while leaving out money for states and cities, hazard pay for frontline workers, and other progressive demands. Why is Nancy Pelosi agreeing to pass such a bill? We don't need interim legislation. We didn't need that first bill. What we needed was a comprehensive bill that would take care of all of the needs. And first, the needs of people, and the needs of state and cities, and the needs of frontline workers. That's what we needed, and this Congress has not bothered to deliver that. They're delivering money for the big shots, which is what they usually do. Ocasio-Cortez said during the conference call on Monday that based on what she has read of the interim bill and press reports, she's leaning towards opposing the measure. Let's stiffen her. Let's tell her she's got to oppose that measure. She's got to safeguard whatever leverage she still has and the other Democrats still have. They can't vote for a bill that fails to deliver the bread to regular people in most of this country. And by the way, Ocasio-Cortez should notice this is a politically dangerous moment. Here is Nancy Pelosi and the DNC working to primary Ocasio-Cortez and defeat her, while they also present her with a shitty little bill that they want her to sign so her primary opponent can ask, what did Ocasio-Cortez get for you? Crumbs. All she got was crumbs. I'm going to do better. That's what's going to happen, folks. You mark my words. This is about gaming the progressives. What the progressives have to do is to defeat this bill if it fails to deliver. And while they're defeating this bill, they also have to all declare as a body that none of them are going to support the candidacy of Joe Biden for the presidency of the United States. That's not going to happen until relief for the rest of us is passed by this Congress. And for the rest of this Congress, everything else should be frozen until relief is passed for us. Ocasio-Cortez said during the conference call on Monday that based on what she's read of the interim bill and press report, she's leaning towards opposing the measure. That's not good enough. Just tell them, I'm opposing the measure off what I've heard. So the final measure that comes across my desk had better be one that bails out the people who need it, or I'm voting against it. That's what she needs to say. New York Democrat and other lawmakers on the call stressed they have yet to see the full text of the bill, and that the bargaining on the measures taking place between Democratic leaders, the Trump administration behind closed door. Yeah, I know. In the usual way, then they're going to present you with a fait accompli. You got to say no. It is insulting to think that we can pass such a small amount of money in the context of not knowing when Congress is going to reconvene, said Ocasio-Cortez, and pass such a small amount of money, pat ourselves on the back, pat yourselves on the ass, and then leave town again. I'm not here to support that. I'm not here for a $5 bill, and I will not insult my community with one. You tell them, AOC. And Waleed Shahid tweets, incrementalism is not helpful in this moment. For people to say, well, we got something, so we might as well support it. We got a nickel, a dime, and $1 trillion bill, so a nickel is more than nothing, so we should support it, is unacceptable. Oh, that's a quote, from AOC. At AOC on hashtag put people first. Okay, and AOC has a video here that you can play when you go to this article. It's a very good video. She's front and center on this, and she's great. The impetus of Monday's call was to outline progressive priorities for what has been dubbed Phase 4 of the federal government's coronavirus relief effort, which has thus far been marred by dysfunction and legislative solutions that do not come close to matching the scale of the public health and economic crisis facing the United States. Quote, the vast majority of people have still not received any relief and bills are piling up. And Pramila Jayapal said that. And she also said, quote, if we're going to climb out of this crisis, we need bold solutions. Well, you've got bold solutions. You've got some from Ilhan Omar. That's the moratorium on mortgages and rent payments and the assumption of those payments by the federal government. And you've also got the Rashida Tlaib Jayapal bill, which provides for $2,000 a month for the duration of the crisis, and $1,000 a month after the crisis, and $1,000 for 1 year after the crisis, and $1,000 a month for each child. In other words, a basic income coming out of the crisis. And a damn good bill it is, too. And it was good to see that the conversation was attended by Rashida and by Ilhan, okay, and Ayanna Pressley and Mark Pocan, the other CPC co-chair, and from such groups as Indivisible and United We Dream and Community Change Action, okay, and Move On. And Rashida said, settling for less means that we lose lives. It does mean that. We do lose lives. And for those of us who don't lose lives, we're deep in the hole because of something that in no way was our fault, because of the virus and because of the failure of Congress to act. And the Progressive Caucus is demanding monthly $2,000 stimulus payments to all U.S. households. If you expect to get those, and if you expect to get a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures, and if you expect to get vote by mail, and a suspension of all consumer debt collection, then what you had better do is to tell people that you're going to freeze Congress for the rest of this session if you don't get that. That comes first. That's number one priority. That's what you've got to do if you want it. You can't give up any more leverage. You gave up too much leverage passing the CARES Act. That was a terrible mistake, except I don't think it was a mistake. I think it was deliberate by Nancy Pelosi, who wanted to give up the leverage. In a Dear Colleague letter on Saturday, Nancy Pelosi wrote vaguely that as negotiations with the Trump administration over the interim legislation move forward, we are working on CARES 2 to prepare for the path ahead to support the lives and livelihoods of the American people, quote unquote. That's baloney sausage. Quote, it is recognized the key to opening our economy is testing, treatment, contact tracing, and quarantine. It is self-evident that America's heart is full of love. Let us be worthy of the American people's generosities of spirit. More baloney sausage. It would be great, Pelosi, if your heart was full of love. Unfortunately, it's not. If it had been, the original CARES Act would have taken care of people. But it did not, because your heart is not full of love. Because you're a slug, a slimy being that needs to be replaced in the hall by Shahed Buttar. On the conference call, progressive lawmakers voiced frustration about the lack of transparency surrounding the interim bill. But like Ocasio-Cortez, they lamented that most of what they know about the legislation has come from news reports. And the co-executive director of Invisible, about Leah Greenberg, raised concern Monday that if Democratic leaders give Republican lawmakers in the Trump administration, and she might have added the centrist Democrats, what they want in the interim legislation, then progressives will have less leverage for the coming fights. I would say even they would have no leverage for the coming fights, but the reason why I will not say that is because the economic situation is getting progressively worse with each passing week. Millions and millions of people are losing health insurance, and of course, even more are losing jobs, and that's going to happen. That happened again last week. We, of course, haven't seen the results of it yet because we won't see that until Thursday. But each succeeding week, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And there is that Fed forecast, okay, the projection, that by the end of June, we're going to be at 52 million people unemployed. And that means a good portion of those 52 million people will be added to the uninsured rolls. So we're going to be looking at 80 million uninsured people by then. 80 million uninsured people, subject to a much greater fatality rate than those who are insured. And they'll be much more vulnerable to the ravages of the coronavirus, too. And we have that coming up. So every week, things are going to get more and more serious, more and more combative. People are going to be more and more radicalized. And so, the general drift of things is that there will be more leverage for the progressives. There won't be less. Other things being equal, there would be less. But things will get even heavier for the Democrats. As things get worse and worse, Nancy Pelosi's position is going to worsen. She's going to have more and more pressure on her to give in or completely abandon all hope that she would be the speaker again in 2021. Because if she continues to act like Herbert Hoover, there's no way she's going to be the speaker again in 2021. She doesn't even have a forlorn hope. Quote, "We know that Republicans are taking advantage of this moment to shovel more money to big corporations. They are simply indifferent to the human suffering unfolding before our eyes," said Greenberg. Quote again, "That's why it's so critical that the Democratic leadership use their leverage and the full power of the House to demand solutions that rise to the needs of the moment." Jayapal echoed Greenberg, saying the Progressive Caucus has real concerns about giving away leverage now without getting some of the priorities that we need. "We have to recognize the urgency of the moment, the scale of the crisis," said Jayapal. "We cannot just give away the things that Republicans want most when we know they're not going to fix the problem that is in front of us. Yes, you've got to force them to join in fixing the problem or it won't get fixed. That's the way politics really works. Politics ain't beanbag. It is hardball. Nancy Pelosi and the other Democrats have to start playing hardball. It's way past time. I thought there was another very interesting article to be covered because I think the author, is right about his main thesis in this article. This one was written in New York Magazine, in the Intelligencer, and the author was Levitz, Eric Levitz, and it was written on April 17th, 2020. And I'm going to share this one also. And this one just struck me as very apt to the current moment. Trump hasn't realized, with all the unemployment, that he's digging himself a huge, deep hole. But who's digging the hole for him? Says Levitz. Our small business sector is burning. Congress sent a fire crew to rush in and bring its occupants to safety. But to ensure that Uncle Sam didn't send more help that was needed, lawmakers put a tight cap on the number of engines authorities could dispatch to counter the blaze. This week, that limit was exceeded. What he's talking about, of course, is the small business bill, when the funds, the 350 billion, was exceeded before small businesses even started getting any of the funds. In other words, the 350 billion were committed funds to applications, but very few businesses have actually gotten any money yet. That was one of the travesties of the whole thing, because that program was going through the SBA, and it was so inefficient at processing things that the money hadn't cleared, gone through the banks to get to the businesses yet. Small businesses are not reporting. They may have applied, but they're not reporting they're getting any money. Of course, there are some small businesses, quote unquote, very large businesses that were getting money. Like, for example, Ruth's Chris got $30 million to help them out. And although everyone in Congress opposes letting small businesses burn alive and believes the cap on fire trucks should be raised, they can't agree on the precise terms of new mom-and-pop rescue legislation. Why? Specifically, Democrats would like to take this opportunity to also dispatch more lifeboats to America's shipwrecked states and cities, while Republicans would prefer to let them flail about in the water a bit longer. And for the moment, the GOP has decided to prioritize by letting municipalities drown over saving small businesses, or in more precise and less figurative terms, the Paycheck Protection Program, which provides small businesses that have been adversely impacted by the coronavirus crisis, i.e. just about all of them, with forgivable loans they can use to cover payroll, rent, by utilities and other expenses. Exhausted its $350 billion reserve this week, less than 14 days after the program took effect. The Republicans want to raise the cap on the program by $250 billion. Democrats would like to do that too, but they also want to send another $150 billion in relief funds to states and cities, increase food stamp benefits, and send $100 billion in aid to hospitals and community health centers. And Eric Levitz isn't even mentioning what people like Rashida Tlaib and Pramila Jayapal and Bernie Sanders would like to do for people in this relief bill. Going on, and they don't trust their Republican colleagues to approve such funding unless doing so is the price of getting businesses what they need. Right. Don't deal with the Republicans until they get you what you need for your constituencies. Eric Levitz says new funding for state and local governments is especially critical since the U.S. federal government can print the world's reserve currency. Screw that. Doesn't matter whether it's our currency is the reserve currency or not. The only thing that matters is that it's a monetary sovereign currency. Okay. They can print our currency because it's a monetary sovereign currency, not because it's the world's reserve currency. Also, they don't print the currency anymore. What happens is the Federal Reserve marks up the Treasury spending account. It's all electronic. There's no printing going on. I mean, 3% of the money is printing. 97% of it is reserves. Okay? And borrow at near zero interest rates. Yes, the Fed will let them borrow at near zero interest rates. It can painlessly sustain government services and stimulate consumer demand through deficit spending. Or, what I would like to see, the Congress can order the Fed to mark up the Treasury spending account with the amount of an appropriation. That's called overt congressional financing. That can be done too. It would be nice if Eric Levitz learned that and started echoing it instead of talking about funding deficit spending with new debt instruments, which of course we can easily float and we can go on supporting forever because it is a sovereign currency, but also those debt instruments always make a political problem because people don't understand that the national debt is not like their debt, and the larger it goes, the more of a political problem it is, which the deficit goals can use to stop spending for progressive things, to stop us from spending on nice things. Eric Levitz needs to learn that and quit trying to con people into issuing more debt instruments. Eric Levitz goes on to say, but states and cities can't do any of those things, and yet they are responsible for financing and implementing the bulk of public education, policing, pandemic response, and countless other core public sector functions in the U.S. Right now, their costs are skyrocketing as need for health care and state-based aid programs rise, while their sales and income tax revenues are cratering as commerce grinds to a halt. If the federal government does not use its money printing power, its money creating power is what we should talk about, to sustain state governments' budgets, then they will be forced to lay off public workers and make by draconian cuts to services, measures that will deepen the present recession and delay future recovery. Yes. And Levitz then makes his point, which would be terrible for Donald Trump. Although the president saw an uptick in approval at the onset of the crisis, so did virtually every other state and national leader presiding over the pandemic, and Trump's boost in support was much smaller than the ones that were racked up by the UK's Boris Johnson's, by Italy's Giuseppe Conte, by France's Emmanuel Macron, or most of the U.S. state governors. Now, as the economic situation deteriorates, Trump's favorability is falling. The most recent Gallup poll puts his approval lower than it's been for 5 months. These developments are all consistent with the thesis that Trump's recent uptick in support was a product of a rally round the flag effect, a common and typically ephemeral tendency in mass publics to grow more supportive of existing leadership at the onset of a major crisis. So what is Trump going to do when the unemployment numbers hit 30 million, 35 million, 40 million? How long will it take to get through people's heads that the whole thing is collapsing, and that the only way to stop the collapse of the economy is to get money into people's hands? That's the first thing that needs to be done. Not to build up a debt overhang that people will not be able to cope with. Not to drive people into bankruptcy simply because you refuse to use the monetary sovereign power of the federal government. Recent polling from Navigator Research buttresses this interpretation. Not only does the pollster find the public souring on Trump's pandemic response, it also reveals that some 10% of voters who say they approve of the president do so more so because, quote, it's important to be supportive of President Trump during this time of national crisis, unquote, than because, quote, Trump has shown strong leadership and taken decisive action throughout the crisis, unquote. So, that's not going to continue for very long when people understand that the unemployment rates are going up to 20%, 25%, even 30%, even 32%, as the Fed has actually projected. And that this level of unemployment is close to 25% more than we had in the Great Depression of the 1930s. When people realize that, what kind of name will Trump have then? Anyway, I leave you to contemplate that, and also to contemplate that these Democrats are giving up their leverage. They're bargaining away their leverage, refusing to use their power to get us what we need. We have to stop that. We have to tell them no. We have to tell them if they go through with that, they won't be leading the Democratic Party anymore, because we're going to beat them come this fall. We don't need any money to vote against a person. And it's not a situation where Trump is waiting on the other side of Nancy Pelosi. If we defeat her, that doesn't cause Trump to be elected. That doesn't hurt Joe Biden's possibilities, of getting elected. If we defeat her and we campaign against her, what's waiting for us on the other side is Shahed Buttar, someone who wants to do everything possible for us. By defeating her, we have everything to gain and nothing to lose, because Nancy Pelosi isn't worth a dime to us. She isn't worth a dime to most of her voters. Not a dime. Chuck Schumer, same thing. Get rid of Chuck Schumer as quickly as possible. When was the last time he did anything for us? Never. And to the people of Kentucky, we can say to them, when was the last time Mitch McConnell did anything for you? You keep on re-electing the guy. We know you don't like him. You need to vote against him just for the sake of voting against him. It doesn't even matter who he's running against. He just deserves to be retired at this point. And Kevin McCarthy comes from California. Let's take care of him too. We don't need any of these congressional leaders. They are failing us, and they have failed us for years. Let's get rid of them, and let's get rid of the people who stand to gain from their going. Hakeem Jeffries of New York, for one. That guy's another loser, like Joe Crowley was. We need to get rid of him too. Anyway, I'll now consider your comments. Thank you. There we go. So, what have you had to say? Please continue to share this. I'd really appreciate it. I hope you've been liking the stream. I've been enjoying it myself. Let's see what you got to say. Jeffrey Denton says here. Hi, Jeffrey. Kay says, I was trying to watch Greg Palast's live stream on the investigation in the Deepwater Horizon explosion, but it was in and out so much I finally came here. Hope he makes a video, though. Would like to watch it. I think he will make a video on that. Probably be a great video, too. And Russ says, I'm hoping to start making appointments for May 18th. Bad thing is that those customers won't be paying me for 30-plus days. Oh, boy. I sure hope you get some relief from the federal government, Russ. Catherine Tokarska says, I applied like second day, got nothing. But today the bank called saying I don't have enough paperwork. When I went into the bank to fill out the app, they didn't ask for anything else. Of course, catch-22, because you're not Ruth's Chris, right? Steve Day smiles. Russell Gorman says, I have some N95 masks here at the house. I will not attempt making residential appointments until the first week of June. A wise decision, Russ. There will be some money coming from the government. I'm sure we can make that happen. Rob says, hey, Yoda. Hey, Rob. Russ says, lost your face on the feed. Your camera may be down, Dr. Joe. Yes, of course it was. It's one of those momentary things that go on. I think it's happened twice, but I don't think it's happened in about an hour, so that's good. Catherine says, I applied for everything now. PP, SBA, disaster loan, unemployment, food stamps. Figured throw out everything, maybe something will stick. Got food stamps, $194 a month. Well, that was good. Catherine says, it's good now. And Lana says, completely lost you. Kay says, they upped my food stamps too, Catherine. Well, that was good, Kay. Glad to hear it. Kay says, Pay-Go Pelosi needs to go. Kay says, I heard that AOC will vote no on the bill as it is. Covered that, of course. Sandy says, gremlins. Catherine says, uh-oh. Steve says, help everyone. Hello, everyone. Steve Day says, I'm sorry, Dale Weaver. No, Steve Wolfbrand says, hello, everyone. Dale Weaver says, please stand by. Steve Day says, Shahid Buttar at Pegolosi. Shahid for change. Actually, he pronounces it Shahed for change. I think in Arabic it would be Shahed or Shahid. Jeffrey Denton, since the crappy Band-Aid fix for the last time the economy crashed is the reason that the economy crashed this time, I was just wondering why, since Obama had to take responsibility for the Bush economy being given as a reason he had to bail out the banks, why is the media not holding Trump accountable and letting him get away with blaming a virus for something the entire world knew was coming way before the virus came along and happened on Trump's watch? Search me! I thought the media was the big resistance to Trump, that they wanted to get rid of him. I don't know why they're not actually blaming. Why was the bailout of the rich corporations necessary so that they got a big part of the CARES Act? Why did they get $454 billion for a slush fund of $4.5 trillion for them? Why did they need it? They needed it because they went into the gambling casino again and they got to the edge of collapse. And the Republicans took the coronavirus crisis as an excuse to bail them out. Never waste a crisis. The Republicans never do waste a crisis to make things worse for us and better for them. Catherine says, Pegosi's fridge costs more than the vehicle I live in. Costs more than the vehicle that I don't live in a vehicle, but costs more than the vehicle I drive in. Yeah. Her fridge was something else. And, I can't believe it, but there was a video on today that talked about essentially Marie Antoinette and let them eat cake. That particular video was a let them eat cake moment. It surely was. Her exhibiting her designer ice creams and designer yogurt in that kind of quantity in that refrigerator was a let them eat cake moment. That woman needs to go. She is disgusting. She gets more and more disgusting with each passing year. I hope the progressives have learned. After the 2018 election, they came into the Congress and they compromised with her. They compromised with her and let her remain as the leader. I'm telling you, if they had gotten behind that conservative screwball, Tim Ryan, they would have gotten a much better deal in this bailout from Tim Ryan. He at least would have cared that workers were getting screwed. He at least wouldn't have stood on ceremony about this fiscal responsibility crap all the time. He wouldn't have cared so much about bailing out the damned rich people in the banks. Gee. Kay says, they're breaking us and people want to go back to work, and that will start the pandemic all over again. Yep, it will. Kay says, I don't want to have to live in a damn mask for the rest of my damned old age. Catherine Tokarska said, some be called today wanting free advice for a restaurant-owning friend about potentially filing bankruptcy, and she let it slip. She was upset California will provide food stamps to immigrants. I'm like, stop. This is not the time. Don't you see that providing money to people to buy basic needs in business, to buy basic needs, keep those who provide more basic needs in business? When I smell a rat like her, I stop being nice. You want answers for questions, you pay for consulting, or keep on fucking off. Good for you, Catherine. Good for you. Okay, but Lana says, I'm also sick of ignorant people blaming immigrants for the issues in this country. Me too. Joanne says, blame corporations, the politicians, and pundits they control. It's not the poor or homeless fault. They're the victims of out-of-control capitalism. And Mustafa Jama says the only solution is to vote them all out. I couldn't agree more. Carrie Scott says, yep, the challenge for this is getting everyone on the same page. Joanne says, vote out all corporate politicians and vote in the MMT progressives. There are more MMT progressives now. There must be 10 or 15 in the Congress who know a little bit, of MMT now. Steve says, shared. Carrie Scott says, it's going to go two ways. Trump looks like a hero that signed a $1,200 check, or he keeps opening his mouth and people start listening. Well, I don't think his signing a $1,200 check is going to make him look like a hero to people, because they'll be told that their payment was delayed by a few days because he had to sign the goddamn checks. Okay, they'll be told that. They'll learn that. That is a fact. Okay? And then they won't appreciate that he made him wait a few days so he could sign their damn checks. Also, that $1,200 is a pittance. He needs to get in back of Tlaib's bill. That's what he needs to do right now, and start getting everybody $2,000 a month while the economy is collapsing. Okay, remember, if it's $2,000 a month per person and they have 2 children, it's $6,000 a month for the family. That bill. That starts paying the bills, folks. That starts paying the bills. Not some bills. I mean, if you were making $250,000 before it happened, then I'm afraid it's not going to cover that. But if you're in the median range, or even a little past it, $72,000 is going to do it for you. And if you can get on Medicare for All as well, $72,000 plus Medicare for All is going to do it for you. In many cases, bigly. Kay says only his stupid base ever listens to him. I can't anymore. And Joanne says $2,000 per month for all the unemployed, including the homeless. Hazard pay for all essential workers. That's a good deal. Kay says all people should get that $2,000. SS has been cut and restricted way too many times the last few decades. It's true. It hasn't at all kept up with the real cost of living, especially not for old people, because our cost of living is much greater than the cost of living adjustment, which is based on what labor was able to get, which is less and less each year. The neoliberals have controlled things. Catherine says, I'll get the money after I'm dead. Rick Maynard says, evening all. And Russ Gorman says, there won't be an SBA loan for me. I filled out paper, but I'm sure it's DOA. Well, maybe you can file some new paper under the extension of the program. It is going to be passed, Russ. It is going to be passed. Even if the progressives hold it up to get some other things in it, it's going to be passed. That extra $250 billion is coming. Maybe more than that. I don't think it's enough. I think they needed $2 trillion for small business. So far, only $500 billion, okay, is taken care of. I think there's another $1.5 trillion to go if they really want to do it. And the small businesses will be pressuring constantly to get all of the $2 trillion that they need. Catherine Tokarska says they care about their donors. Sandy says they absolutely should lose their seats. Yeah, they need to be told that we know this time, unlike 2009 and 2010, we know that they're the people failing to get what we need. We've seen what they do. Our eyes are on them now. We know that they should go. Carrie says a lot of people are sending postcards simply saying you're fired to the White House. That's fine, but they need to send postcards saying you're fired to Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy too. Kay says, hi, Carmen. Carmen says, hi, sunshine. And Sandy says, some are getting sent to old bank accounts. I know. Kay says, laugh out loud. Thank you for that, Carmen. Do I sound sunny to you? And Catherine says, oh, yeah, I got to do that. And Lana says, that would be my son. He has a different bank account now. And Rick Maynard says, a better question. Who got their $1,200? Kay says, not me, Richard. Carrie says, I'm getting mine tomorrow. Sending more than one. Well, that's good. Carmen said, are you guys getting audio? Carrie says, not me. Barbara says, oppose it, stand up for the truth. Kay says, good audio here, Carmen. Sandy says, yes, Carmen. I don't think the DNC really wants to win, whether they do or not. Their money and power, okay, is good to go. Well, it may be the DNC doesn't want to win, but they want to have Nancy Pelosi in the Congress as the Speaker again. They do want that. And we can put more than a bee in their bonnet if we get rid of her. Catherine says I should set up a table on the street and hand out pre-filled addressed postcards to people as long as they buy a stamp and mail for them. I would pay for stamps but can't afford. And Barbara Wernick says someone needs to take a stand. Carmen Munez, it's my device again. Thanks for the audio feedback. I can hear now, but stream stopped. Got to switch a device. Sandy Degg says AOC 2024. Yep, AOC 2024. And Kay says, I heard today AOC my primary Schumer in 2022. I don't know if AOC is ready to step up to the Senate. The problem, it all depends on the situation in the country at large, because I don't think AOC is going to be as popular statewide as she is citywide. I mean, New York City, downstate, she's going to be very, very popular. But a lot of those people in the upstate part of New York are very conservative, and unless the economy there is taking a very, very big hit, and she can come at them with the Green New Deal, she probably won't be able to beat Schumer, who is probably too well established for AOC to challenge him. It might be Zephyr Teachout could do it. I know she's lost, a few times, but she's a really good candidate, and I think that she's more popular upstate than AOC is at this point. But wait, AOC has 2 years to go. By 2022, she could easily be that popular as the country radicalizes. And boy, there's nothing so calculated to radicalize them as this complete breakdown in the economy. It's really something, and we haven't started seeing the impact yet. It's only a few weeks old. We haven't even gotten into May yet, and June yet, and people don't have jobs. Oh boy. People are going to be radicalized. AOC can talk to them about the real causes. The real causes are neoliberal capitalism. She can talk to them really good about that. Catherine says, all each of these politicians cares about is their own net worth, and usually that also means keeping themselves in power. Okay, Avril Mano says, hi Avril, I don't think I've seen you before, so welcome. And Avril says she's being challenged for her current seat. I sent her a money bomb. Great, Avril. That was excellent. Avril, I heard that too. The one that is primarying her has been a GOP until now. Avril said, wow, just chimed in. Did AOC call Pelosi a sluggish? Laugh out loud. No, I think it was I who called Nancy Pelosi a slug and a slime ball. Kay says, tells me all I need to know about the DOC, about the DNC, that the GOPs are now joining the party. How about you guys? GOP people have been joining this party since the 1980s, Kay. What was Leon Panetta? What was Leon if not a GOPer for so many years? He was a GOPer. Gee, they've been joining for so long. I mean, what was Hillary Clinton? She was a GOPer. She was a Goldwater supporter. Sandy Degg says, I hope she loses. SOTH. I don't know what SOTH means. Steve says, this could get ugly as people become more and more desperate. Kay says, there was a live stream on FB earlier today about securing your vote by mail. I was going to watch it until I saw the speakers were almost all neoliberal Dems. Blew it off. Catherine said, the large firm, my main competitor, got the money. I saw shown the deposit myself. Jeez. Sorry, Catherine. Barbara said, could you just imagine Pelosi, McConnell, and Graham all lose? Happy days, people. Yeah, I would love that. I would love that. Yeah, Pelosi, McConnell, okay, and Lindsey Graham all lose. And Kevin McCarthy. Don't forget Kevin. We don't want to leave him out. We want him to lose too. Right away. Happy days, people, says Barbara Warning. What kind of business is Ruth's Chris? It's a restaurant, Avril. It's a steakhouse. It's pretty big here in the Washington, D.C. area. Now, they have a few of them here. They cook the steaks in butter. Very unkosher. Kay says, High Buck Steakhouse, Avril.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we went once to Ruth Chris.
I don't like steak.
During our salad days when I was doing some consulting here, we went to Ruth's Chris once, and I was underwhelmed, to say the least. I don't like to cook steaks in butter. That's not my idea of how you cook a steak. Sandy says it would be the best gift ever. I think you were talking about defeating all those people. That would be the best gift ever. That might even make us forget if Joe Biden should actually win. And by the way, I wouldn't give a fig for Joe Biden's chances, except that I think that Trump and the Republicans are screwing up the economy and screwing up the virus crisis to such a fantastic degree that I don't even know if a blithering idiot could lose. So I'm saying I don't know if Joe Biden could lose. Get it? Got it? Good. Catherine says, to maintain my advertising spot, I need to pay the monthly fee. If I don't, these large firms will snap up my place and take the business that will be coming soon. So I got to pay the advertising before I pay the rent. Oh my God. That's awful. Just awful. Steve says steakhouses, upscale and good steaks, which they cook wrongly in butter. Kay says, what kind of biz do you have, Catherine? Okay, and Avril says, okay, thanks. That explains why I don't know what it is. I rarely eat out. Yeah, that kind of food is no good for you anyway, Avril. It's no good. It's got to be more vegan. More vegan. I never heard of it either, says Kay, until I moved to Southeast North Carolina years ago. There was one close to the Rich Bitch Beach there in the Wilmington area. Okay, and Lana says a very expensive steakhouse. I hate to tell you, Lana, but there are more expensive steakhouses than that here in the Washington area. It's a reasonably expensive. It's a high-end steakhouse. Okay, it certainly is. But there are one or two here in Washington that are more expensive than that. I mean, I forget their names. I've never been in them. Steve says, Russell, you should be eligible for unemployment, small business loan, and food stamps. His eligibility is fine, but getting through the bureaucracy, Kay, is another thing. Steve says, rent strikes. Kay says, mortgage strikes too, Steve. LA had a car protest along those lines just yesterday. I saw it on FB. Avril says, someone said this pandemic depression will last 18 months due to the protesters causing more contagious, causing more contagion to up the curve. Contagious up the curvature is what Avril says. I'm not sure I know what that means, but I think it means driving the curve up so that
What's yours?
The rate of contraction increases. Steve says, we did at the mayor's home. Kay says, even if they aren't the cause, it is going to last a couple of years. Barbara says, he knows. He wants desperation to force us back to work. Those who refuse to comply will be heroic. Some of them will be considered to be big heroes, and others will consider the people who are going back to work to be big heroes. It's going to be split. Hopefully enough people are sensible to see that the heroes are the people who are staying home. Kay says, I saw that, Steve. Good job. Avril says, when is the GOP finally going to impeach the king of Covfefe? He is the king of Covfefe. Certainly true. Steve says, anybody seen Joe Biden lately? He was at home eating ice cream. Kay says, never. He just makes them richer.
Anybody know why they picked him?
Yeah, because they thought that he was the only one left standing after Sanders got through with them. He was the only one left standing. I mean, all the others had been already rejected by the voters. He was the only one whose polling was in decent shape compared to Bernie. And so so Clyburn, and Obama figured, well, we can't have Bernie, so let's go do it. Let's go get that. Okay, let's make it happen. I lost the feed here on my comments, but I think I'm going to have to call it a night. Oh, yes, Pelosi with her ice cream. Good Lord. Yeah, maybe he went to Pelosi's to eat some of her designer ice cream. Maybe that's what happened to Biden. I just lost my place was where someone said, Sandy Deck said Biden is really Waldo. Yeah, right. Where's Waldo? Nope, Steve. Saw a couple of POS ads for him, and that's about it. And they were POS ads, all right. Couldn't believe those ads. Boy, they were some real Madison Avenue bologna sausage. That's what I thought. Oh, Kay is getting slammed with COVID again because. Oh, Kentucky is getting slammed with COVID again because of the desperate to die for the Dow protesters. Yes, Avamano. Yeah. I guess there's a terrific comparison of Tennessee with Kentucky. At least until now, there has. I understand Kentucky's been doing very well, much better than Tennessee. So, what happened? Has the contraction rate of COVID started going up in Kentucky again? I thought Andy Bashir was bending the curve there. And Steve Wolfbrand says, Doc, what's your take on oil price going below zero?
How do they
I mean, I don't know what
that?
kind of take I should have on that. I mean, obviously, these people produced so much oil, and for the short term, we're using so little of it because everybody's staying at home
It's a good time.
that the oil prices, have tanked to the point where storing oil is much more expensive than buying oil.
Solar power.
So people are unwilling to buy oil because they have to pay more. I mean, it's market stuff. It's not that it's free market stuff because the whole thing was actually perpetrated by the Russians and the Saudis having a price war, and that's made the situation much, much worse. But for the poorer countries that have a lot of oil to sell, and even some of the richer ones like Canada that have a lot of oil to sell, it's a bad time for them because their oil is worth nothing. It just increases the economic crisis when it comes to Venezuela. They now have even more problems than they had before. Case has been having those protests daily here in POS, Ohio, too. POS, Ohio. Okay, Avril says, I don't think that's a good slogan for Shahid. 2, Obama PTSD inducing itch. Inducing itch. PTSD. PTSD inducing itch. Alana says, a bunch of morons protesting at the governor's mansion in Minnesota a few days ago. Faceplant. I know. They were doing that in Michigan also, and creating a problem for Gretchen Whitmer. If she knew that was going to happen, she should have left the election to Abdul al-Said. He would have done a much better job of handling them anyway. They would have been there. They would have been protesting the Muslim governor who had shut down the state. Then he could have called out the police against them. Mana says, oh yes, Pelosi with the ice cream. Good Lord. Jay says, people need money and they aren't getting any from the government. Maybe they can get some some ice cream from Nancy. Avril says, is Katie Porter progressive? She's considered to be fairly progressive, especially when it comes to the financial system and being quite upset with the banks, being in strongly favoring the very being very tight with the banks, keeping them on a tight string. Where she is on fiscal matters I'm not sure. I don't know how sophisticated she is on fiscal matters. I think she is for Medicare for all. I seem to recall she was a supporter or a co-sponsor of that. However, you need to keep in mind, Avro, that she was a co-author of Senator Warren's on one, of Warren's books, and she's a protege, of Warren's. And generally, if it comes to it, she would line up in back, of Warren, I think, on most things. Kay says, I voted for Aaron Godfrey for Congress here in Ohio. He's a progressive, a physicist, a young guy. Yeah, I know who he is. I interviewed him at one point in 2018. When he ran then, he didn't really know much about fiscal stuff, at that time. He was a little backward on the fiscal side, a pretty conventional progressive, I recall. Of course, he's probably far better than the competition. Kay says, Catherine says to Kay, I'm a bankruptcy attorney. We're getting ready for all hell to break loose, but it won't happen for months. There is always a delay. And Kay says, when it starts, you will be crazy busy, Catherine. Steve says, you'll be rich. You'll laugh out loud. Avril says, lost the sound, don't know why. Corey Marin says, please STFU. I don't know who that is, but directed at Corey. But if it's directed at anybody here, then I will block you, because all the people here are very good people. And we don't deserve to have an STFU directed at us. Kay says, refresh, Avril. And Lana says, for you, I'm glad you will be busy, but I hate what created this. Avril says, thank you. And Avril says, I wish COVID would help some of those established. And Christine Marie says, Kay Clark Ryan, because it's continually stolen, siphoned off, or transferred to the rich, because you can't have too many billions or billions. We don't matter. Ask Mitch. Ask Nancy. She'll say the same. And Kay says, Avril, those people refuse to go to work. Avril says, having refresh issues. Kay says, I know Joe Warren was a GOP too, till a few years ago. And Charles Cagriaden says, what a brutal ad. Twitter.com. Peter J. Hassan. Well, there's a link there. I'm not in a position to check that out and see how brutal it is. Avril says, hi, Doc. This is your nutty buddy Carmen using someone else's device and account to try to catch you tonight. Thanks for the welcoming. Okay, Avril. If I recall my French, that's French, for April. Which means, I think, that Avril is female. Is that not right, Carmen? And Lana says, laugh out loud, unkosher, is that a word? You're damn well that's a word. That's a word. Yeah, the majority of Jewish homes in the United States are probably unkosher. Don't quote me on that. I'm not quoting any survey data. Let's just say most of my compatriots in that respect are unkosher. Okay, and Bonnie, is waving at me to say goodnight. And so I am going to say goodnight. So thank you all very much. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you for all the activism. And Avril says, yes, definitely female. Kay says, I can imagine, Catherine. Okay, thank you all very much, and good night, And thank you for keeping my numbers up tonight. Thank you for the sharing.
Very well.
Oh, and don't forget my Patreon account. It's at patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I'll see you next time. I'll have another crackling video for you next time. Nancy, you're here. Nice to see you here. Good night, and thanks. And night to you, Kathy. And night to you, Mustafa. And night to you, Steve and Lana. Catherine says, if you want to get rich as a lawyer, represent rich people or go into politics. So we need some good people in politics, Catherine. When are you going in? Sandy says, good night. Put that in the links. And Avromano says, good night. Good hope no unkosher bed bugs bite. Thanks. Good night.